All the issues I had in life basically reached their end stage or lowest point when I was around age 22. I lived all alone in a one-room apartment on Social Security disability. It took 2 steps to get from the bed to the computer. I could open the refrigerator with one hand and the oven with the other. The bathroom and shower was a shared facility, and I would basically exist attached to my computer in a barely functional state. I kept myself entertained, that was enough, so that I wouldn't go crazy from boredom. Beyond that, I had no aspirations, other than not killing myself until I died of old age. I made the occasional half-hearted attempt to improve myself, but it typically died after a few weeks. I would probably still be in that situation, were it not for the fact that my parents continued to look for things that would help me. At around age 28, they finally did find something called neurofeedback. Neurofeedback is looking at the electrical amplitudes and frequencies given off by the brain, and then attempts to manipulate those that make life difficult into something more manageable, or to teach the brain what patterns to hold and what ones aren't so useful. This modification of my brain's behavior empowered me to make progressive changes in my life without excessive drugs or social support structures that would have just been crutches. In this video, I will be going over how each of my disabilities was impacted. The effects of neurofeedback on my attention deficit disorder was one of the most profound experiences of my life. When I had my first EEG brain scan for my neurofeedback therapy, my therapist told me during the concentration portion of the test, "Your head looks like it's on marijuana when you're concentrating." I've never had the stuff, but if that's what marijuana is like, I don't ever want to do it. In my video on what attention deficit disorder was like for me, I touch on the idea that concentration isn't what I thought it was. I learned for the first time during neurofeedback the distinction between what is and is not concentration. This occurred during a session when I was sitting in the chair, looking at the computer screen interface, having neurofeedback treatment, and the therapist voice cuts over the activity I was doing and asked me what I was thinking and feeling right then. I wasn't really certain. Passive, relaxed, but not quite the same, was what came to mind. The therapist had been looking at my brainwave frequencies. He told me what I was feeling right then was what concentration and learning was for normal people. And I was blown away. I would have never associated those feelings, that type of thinking, with learning. In that moment, I realized instantly why I'd burned out so quickly. My whole life, I had been learning wrong. I never really knew what concentration and focus was, what I thought it was. The type of focus that I had been doing was only reinforced by people who could only see the outside of my behaviors, not the inside. The fact that I could learn in a relaxed state was... I understood everyone else, how they could concentrate, how they could learn, how they could do it all semester if still have plenty of room to spare for anything else they wanted to do. It was really something. So, in that 1-hour session, I discovered the reason behind so much of my failures in life and the resulting stress, the suffering, the sorrow over some 20 years. My therapist told me it was okay to be angry. Maybe I was a little, but it's hard to be angry when it really wasn't anyone's fault. I didn't know, neither did anyone else. And what I did learn to do was take advantage of what I had gained. And scholastically, I had made some major improvements in my life since then. Frankly, I was more excited than I was mad. Because finally I could access my potential in some way. I'm uncertain as to what neurofeedback may or may not have done to help specifically with my obsessive compulsive disorder. I do know that both neurofeedback and the heart rate variability techniques have greatly helped in lowering my overall stress levels and increased my tolerance for things that my OCD would throw at me, and to assist me in the stress that I have to separate myself from. I guess you could say that some of the more wild and crazy ideas that come from my OCD behaviors has declined, but I still obsess over thoughts and feel compulsions to do things, but I no longer suffer from the delusion that the fate of the universe hangs in the balance, although I could personally suffer some disaster. Neurofeedback has had and continues to have a profound effect on my autism. First, there was the diagnosis of autism. As someone with high-functioning autism or Asperger's syndrome, there was always some level of doubt as to whether or not I had autism at all. When you have as many issues as I do, they all sort of overlap and it starts to get confusing, and when people try to separate one issue from the other, my first neurofeedback scan showed a very clear picture that I indeed did likely have autism. Part of that formula was the fact that the left side of my brain was over-functioning, the logic, and the right side of my brain was under-functioning, the emotion, and it was a separation of the two sides of my mind I had discovered that was resulting in a lot of my issues. I was trying to fit life through two different filters, favoring one side more than the other. As usual with autism, it's the logic side. This slowed everything down. It also frequently resulted in me feeling very confused about things, as one side had a piece of my life's puzzle that didn't make sense on its own, and it didn't share it very well with the other side because it got scared. Neurofeedback trained me to stop fighting myself and integrate both sides. This was not easy. In fact, it was painful and frightening, and there were a lot of setbacks and crashes adopting this new way of thinking. My brain, its structure or pattern would alter each session, and I would have to learn to adjust to the new pattern or suffer a crash or a meltdown. But over time, I improved. At first I was a little afraid of losing myself, being something other than what I was, only to discover that, like with a good marriage, both sides, when they're integrated, make the other stronger. Over time, I learned to manage my stress better with autism. I developed an increased capacity to manage the sensitivity issues. Sunlight and the outdoors no longer became torturous situations for me to deal with. Exercise and the feeling of having my body ache, icky sweat covering me, the associated tasks of just getting myself to do things were no longer difficult. Those things that I couldn't imagine would be worth the effort. Although it's still hard sometimes to motivate me to do things like get out and lose weight, but from what I hear, that's normal for everybody. Being around a large group of people in motion, energetic states don't cause me to panic or shut down, but I still have preferences. I have also learned to engage myself emotionally more often. For therapy, most of my outward emotional expressions fell into certain specific categories: deadpan lifeless, mocking laughter, acid sarcasm, dry interest, and ragingly frustrated. These emotional states were negative and very defensive. Now, I am capable of those emotions still, but I am willing to express a whole lot more. And I feel I've lost a lot of my defensive tone, unless I'm playing League of Legends. One of the big questions I had when I started neurofeedback was, would altering my brain alter myself? I value my autism. I didn't want to lose the benefits of my mind's unique way of viewing the world. Well, it's been 10 years now, and I can honestly say I still am and see myself and view the world from my autistic perspective. However, I am now better able to process and express that perspective. Are there aspects of myself that I could try to reshape into a more neurotypical form? Possibly, but neurofeedback can't force a change on a person. It can't make someone adapt to a new way of thinking. They have to want to accept it. So there are some aspects of my autism that I stubbornly cling to because I personally value them beyond the still sometimes painful issues and trouble those aspects get me into from time to time. All in all, neurofeedback has made me more of myself as I want to be, instead of the idea of being less autistic and more normal. Before my neurofeedback treatment, my depression would cripple me for weeks at a time. Aside from a general state of depression that has always had me below what one might consider a normal state of functioning, there were cyclic calamities of depression. There were three particular pieces to this state of depression: sinking into depression, being down at the bottom, and then the climb back up. Though it took a very long time, neurofeedback began to modify those three categories. First, I have a higher tolerance before I feel with that shift within myself, where I feel I'm starting to sink into depression. So I don't sink quite as well. Second, when I do hit the bottom of that depressionary state, I don't stay there for a long time, and then I climb back out a whole lot faster. So I will still have these dips, but when they occur much less frequently, and they occur in that really low range. They don't last down there, down that far that much. Before neurofeedback, I vaguely remember that I would have days I felt good and normal, but those would only occur between months of depression. Now, things are sort of the other way around. At least they seem to be. Critical states of depression where I'm dead and suicidal and can't get myself to do anything occur once every 6 to 8 months. Very low depressive dips occurring once every few months. Also, I rebound a whole lot faster than what I used to. Having the episode sometimes only lasts maybe a day or so. This process was not an easy one though either. It took a very long time. I had to learn to trust that I wouldn't be betrayed by myself so much. That anything I tried to put together in my life wasn't going to be doomed to fall apart due to another trigger of depression. There are many depressionary setbacks, as I learned. I couldn't push my mind too hard or too fast. Even today, I can't say I'm fully recovered from my crippling depression. And I feel as though I still have a long way to go in some ways. As to my general emotional state, I still have a hard time with the concept of happy. However, I have shifted my attitude from life as pain and living as torture, and I wish I could just lay down and die in my sleep, to I might not be able to say I'm happy yet, but if I died tomorrow, I could accept it, but I'd be somewhat annoyed about it. I don't think reaching "it's good to be alive and I'm glad to be here" is just a pipe dream now. However, I think I still have a long way to go to reach that point. In my video about stress, I'll go over some unhealthy coping mechanisms that I developed due to my specific disabilities. However, I didn't talk about how I generally deal with stress that isn't specific to my disabilities. For me, I would flog myself and get very angry with myself for the slightest perceived failure, flaw, or setback. Anything that could result in me feeling stressed, I would beat myself over. My threshold for dealing with irritation was very low. I was constantly living in a state where I was always sighing or clenching myself to keep my frustration in check. One of the first things I learned to do in therapy sessions, and I attended in neurofeedback, was this biofeedback technique called heart rate variability, where neurofeedback is primarily dealing with the brain itself. Biofeedback deals with the rest of the body. And heart rate variability deals rather specifically with the heart itself and the heart rhythm, and how you can use it to regulate your emotions. Throughout most of classical literature, strong emotional states are not attributed to the mind, but to the heart. Raging fury, passionate love, inner peace, broken-hearted sadness. When it comes to simply feeling something, most people attribute those emotional states to something their heart feels rather than their brain feels. Heart rate variability is learning to exercise a measure of control over your heart, and through it, control your emotions. The heart is always beating, and the rate of its beat fluctuates based on the state your body is in. A lot of this is uncontrollable due to organs and system processes that run automatically. However, there is one critical system that all people can temporarily assume control over, and that is your lungs. Stop breathing, stop breathing. And right smack dab in the middle of your lungs, more or less, is your heart. So, when you breathe in, you put pressure on your heart, squeezing it, causing it to beat faster, work harder. And when you breathe out, your heart is no longer constricted and can relax more and beat slower. Heart rate variability is learning to pair this control of the heart, this state of emotion, with certain key emotional states that you conjure up in your mind, that you want more of in your life, like peace, relaxation, calm. As a person exercises practicing to pair this heart rate variability technique, the heart begins pairing those emotional states with that particular state of rhythmic fluctuation. While I can say this technique does work for me, it did take practice. I first had to find a way to pair that emotional state with, or I had to pair in a positive emotional state with that fluctuation of my heart, something that wasn't so great and easy to do when you're depressed all the time and don't have a lot of positive emotions to draw upon. But in order to ensure that I could learn how to do this, to manage my stress, I deliberately picked activities that I knew would trigger stress. And one of those activities was I always wanted to learn how to juggle. Or I would go out and shoot baskets. Now typically in life, whenever I would fail to catch something or miss a basket when I was shooting, I would immediately get really mad at myself. So every time I got mad at myself, I would engage this heart rate variability technique, and I would immediately de-stress. And over time, I got better and better at this. Now, I didn't get better and better at shooting baskets. I still can't juggle to save my life. But I built in this ability to manage my own stress through a simple technique of breathing. The amazing thing about heart rate variability, though, is the speed at which it takes over. I would want to say it's immediate, but in truth it's probably about as long as it takes your heart to make a single beat, which is far faster than any other stress relief technique that I know of. The relief from anxiety is just great. There's no pill to get, there's no happy place, there's no holding your breath and counting to 10. At a certain points in my life during events that would have been very stressful for me, for anyone, I found myself automatically performing this technique and coasting through this. What's even more cool is that if you stop doing the technique during these stressful events, you'll immediately start to feel stressed again, which fills you with an empowering sense of control, which is a reward in and of itself, because finally you have a technique in which you can regulate yourself and you feel this control over your life. And it's not a crutch. It's with you all the time. This is what I see as the most value of neurofeedback. For the longest time, therapy and psychology has either conjured up some rather wild speculations as to how the brain works, or has just tried to ignore that the brain was there altogether, since they can't actually tell, and just focused on what goes into the person and what effect this has on their behavior. The brain was always left as the great unknown. Well, now, slowly the brain is being known, and assumptions can be made based on the behavior of the brain itself in almost real-time electrical impulses. With neurofeedback, you can finally teach the unteachable, apply effects directly instead of just making educated guesses, and empowering people to receive treatment, to know they can have an active role of what they once thought was uncontrollable, to make it controllable.